is a partner in Carlsmith Ball, one of the biggest, oldest law firms in the state, and with offices in other states, I might add. On community matters, that's who we are. We're on community matters because community does matter. And we're talking about offshore investments. We're talking about managing offshore investments. Last Thursday, just a week ago, we had a panel program, luncheon panel program in Lani Akea, a downtown forum program where we discussed offshore investments and how to better manage them. And Gerry was a speaker in the panel in that program, and he was brilliant. So we thought we'd have some more of that, Gerry. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jay. Pleasure to be with you.
So first, let's see, who you are and your background in terms of business law and what you do at Carlsmith and the Asia Development Bank as well.
Well, in very brief, I've been in legal practice now for a number of years, and it's all been with Carlsmith Ball Law Firm, which is Hawaii's oldest firm, originating back in 1857 in Hilo. Most of the work that I have been doing in more recent times, not all, but most of it, has centered on the development of energy and energy infrastructure projects. So be it geothermal, wind, solar, biomass, even OTEC, and other forms of renewable energy, plus fossil fuel energy and LNG. I've had the opportunity and, quite frankly, the great pleasure to be involved in. And a lot of that work is very gratifying because the people that are involved in it are contributing to Hawaii's renewable energy progress and renewable energy portfolio standards, and are, by and large, very good corporate citizens committed to Hawaii and its work that is socially redeeming. So we put all that together, and plus the challenges involved, and it's quite a gratifying set of activities.
You're a progressive, aren't you?
Oh, I don't know what you mean by progressive.
Well,
but
we're progressive, so I think we're on the same page as you.
Well, if I'm like Jay, then yes, I'm progressive.
Oh, all right. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So we're going to talk about offshore investment, and my own thoughts to lead into that is that Hawaii is an isolated island state. Hawaii has always been capital poor, and it is certainly capital poor now. And over the past, well, few years, I guess you could say, not since statehood, but say the past 20 years or so, we have more often than not shot ourselves in the foot about getting substantial capital in the door to build the state, to build industry in the state, to build infrastructure, to make the state work like a state on the mainland. And it seems like, to me, we don't have as much capital available to us as a lot of other states. And the question of the panel and the question today, among other things, is why is that? Why don't we have as much capital as we want? We're a very attractive place, but there's something about our persona that seems to send capital away sometimes. Thoughts?
Well, it's a little bit of a complicated subject in this sense that, yes, we are capital poor. There's no question about that, and that's been the case since and throughout, I think, Hawaii's history. But we've also had a great deal of capital infusion, very successful capital infusion over the past several decades. We probably take it for granted now, but much of the development that we called our tourism destination infrastructure, to wit, hotels and related facilities, those were successfully done, by and large with great acceptance, although there have been exceptions. Our shopping center areas, even though they were developed by local firms like Dillingham when it was a public corporation based here, again, was with foreign capital.
You're referring to Ala Moana.
Ala Moana Shopping
Center. Which is
Center,
now held by offshore investors.
That is correct. The wave of Japanese investment in the early 70s, again, most of it targeted to resort destination facilities and golf courses and so forth, have been there. And that, by and large, has been successful. Not to be overlooked, by the way, are investments that come in the form of the sale of state and county and municipal bonds, which bring in funds that basically fund our infrastructure of various sorts, highways, roads, schools, so forth and so on. Those are things that I think we basically take for granted. Now, that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is projects that have been sought to be developed that have run into controversies, sometimes so much so that they basically either failed or have been stopped. Very prominent in recent years, of course, is the super ferry episode as one. Now you can look at it in a variety of different ways. Were mistakes made? Were things not done? Was it a good project in itself? And all those questions are there, and they're all legitimate questions, and by and large, I think, have sought to have been answered. But the point is, that project came, it was started, a lot of controversy erupted, it failed, and the image went around the world about that. Whether it was like it or lump it, for the reasons, that was the image. Why did that happen? And that raises questions in the minds of potential investors of, is Hawaii a good investment environment? Meaning, is it a place where if we work with all the parties we have to work with in that environment, the government officials, the various communities that are there, so forth and so on, if we follow all of the laws and regulations, which in all cases are federal, state, and county, if we try to do the community outreach and all of those sorts of things that we're advised to do, and then at the last moment, something comes up that's totally unexpected and oppose us and basically cost us or cost the investor more money, or essentially make the investor decide that it's not worth it, that they can invest someplace else that really wants them. That's the other side of the story. And we can go into a lot of the reasons why those kinds of things happen.
Well, let's look at super ferry.
Okay.
I mean, I think super ferry it's still radioactive, but it's also very instructive about the processes, that I was referring to in terms of things that push investors away, make them more concerned. In that case, people make the distinction between super ferry and other projects by saying super ferry didn't follow the law, okay? But you know what? If you assume that super ferry had Wall Street investment money there, they came and they went to the governor. They got to the governor, which is not everybody can do that, and they said, we need to raise money right away. We have Wall Street banks that are waiting on approvals. What can you do to help us? And she and her attorney general said, let me show you how to do this. They followed that advice. Now, maybe that wasn't advice that you or I, as counsel, conservative counsel, would have given them, but it's what the government gave them. And they followed that advice, and it was fatal. Because in two separate cases, the Supreme Court showed them a thing or two and ultimately stopped them from operating, whereupon they said, we had enough, we're leaving town. We're gonna drop a couple of $100 million here and leave town. Very tragic, because it was a well-run operation. It was actually operating, and it was serving the needs of the people. Maybe not the big shipping companies, but the people. So all of us lost so much in that. And as you say, there are newsletters and wires and, all kinds of ways of communicating what happens here in this kind of adventure to every investor in the world overnight, immediately. And they all became aware that we had given ourselves this huge black eye. I mean, as long as it's radioactive locally, it's radioactive internationally. It's the same thing. And I don't know how we can live with ourselves, because it's not a matter of saying the Supreme Court was wrong, the governor was wrong, the legislature was right. It's we collectively sent them away. We collectively sent them away. We didn't have a collective feeling to welcome investment. And we found it very easy to bash them, and we did, including the media. So, I mean, I think it stands 10 feet tall as to how not to do it.
Well, I won't necessarily disagree with you. It is a complicated situation, and I'm not saying that to fudge the issue or punt on the issue, but there are a number of different nuances to it, okay? Part of our real situation is that's been done. It's done. We can't change it. Okay, can't change the past. The question is today and tomorrow. And the one thing about memories is, in certain respects, they're very long. Sometimes they even change what the recollection of what was really was. Other times they're willing to say, well, maybe there's a change. And one of the challenges we have, because Hawaii is, I think, maybe not universally, but there's a large perception that Hawaii is a tough place to do business. And certainly on many of the best places to do business rankings that one hears about, Hawaii tends to be on the bottom part of it. And you have people, justifiably or not, like Steve Forbes, who talks about the Republic of Hawaii and writes articles for Fortune magazine to that respect.
And the reference is what, to China, or some banana republic, maybe?
Possibly, but but China, of course, has been the recipient of tremendous foreign direct
China's doing better than we are.
But again, I mean, if you look at some of the more recent projects and take a lot of the energy projects, okay, the wind farms we have, the solar farms that we have, the geothermal operations that we have, all of which, or most of the public really feels are beneficial to Hawaii. That's all foreign investment. Those were foreign, if you will, non-Hawaii developers who partnered with Hawaii partners and who wanted to be and are, by and large, good corporate and social and economic citizens. And those are working and working very, very well.
You know, Mike Sikorsky was here the last couple of days, and we talked about the flow of capital. And one thing he made clear, and I'm sure you've seen this because you've been in international banking, one thing he made clear is that money flows around the world, and sometimes it flows in steps, indirectly. It flows to one country, then another country, then another country. And by the time it finishes its trip, you know where it came from because it's all fungible anyway. So it's a global capital market that we have to cope with and be conscious of and, deal with, pitch to. Make them work for us. That's one of the things that came out of that program last Thursday. I thought it was important that you have to understand that market.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And again, we think Hawaii is a very special place, and it is, okay? But from the perspective of someone who is seeking to invest funds, and we all do this even in our own individual lives on a much, much smaller scale, but you have choices. Do you go to this store or that store? Do you buy this appliance here or at someplace else? And you look for price, you look for quality, you look for service, you look for post-purchase, service, et cetera, et cetera. It's a whole bag of things, not just money, but you choose among various alternatives. Similarly with investment capital. Would you go to some place where you may have a good prospect of return if it goes well, but it is really, really tough to do that? Would you go to some place like maybe a Singapore or a Hong Kong or a possibly state of Washington or whatever, I'm told, where you're welcome and they give you the right kind of incentives and there is no corruption and so forth and so on? Do you go to Nigeria or Somalia, whatever? You have choices, and the capital goes, the money goes where it feels it would be welcome. And the question then is, if we have projects that need that kind of capital, because we don't have it, and we cannot go to the bank or will not go to the bank to borrow it and pay commercial rates, can we get that kind of capital, and for what, and then how do we attract it and keep it? And we have many successful examples of this, and we also have some examples where things didn't work out for any number of reasons too. And of course, the ones that don't work out tend to get the publicity, as is always the case.
Yeah. But it seems, though, that if we could get together on the idea of wooing capital, grooming ourselves to be attractive and not unattractive, we could have as much capital as we wanted for any project. Then we could pick and choose which investors we wanted to deal with.
Well, maybe yes and maybe no, because remember, too, that we are a small place. And one of the, whether you look at it as an advantage or not, but one of the facts of a small place is what is your base, or let's put it very bluntly, what projects do you have that investors would be interested in? Because what you're looking for is investing your money, having it go to work relatively quickly, getting some kind of return that you find satisfactory, and ultimately giving you the reward that you want. Just as you buy a certain kind of car over another kind of car, or buy a house in a particular area as opposed to another area. I mean, again, on all different levels, that's the kind of thing that you look for. So when we look at Hawaii and we say, all right, Mr. Overseas foreign direct investment person with a lot of money to spend, please come and spend it in Hawaii. And your obvious first question is, well, what do you have? That's
So
right.
can you list that? We're going to have a break in a minute,
Okay.
but before we get to the break, I'd really appreciate it if you could just list the major categories that you would offer to that foreign investor.
Well, one of them that's been proven out right now, and this is not, by the way, first priority, but one of them that just comes to mind because I'm somewhat familiar with it, is renewable energy projects.
Okay.
Most of our renewable energy projects have benefited from that. A second one, again, this is more traditional, have been resort destination facilities, hotels. Third,
Agriculture.
yeah, to a certain extent, but these days, I'm not quite sure what large-scale agricultural investment that
Right.
you do have.
There are questions about that.
Yeah, because the state really has made large-scale agricultural development somewhat difficult to do. If you talk about, manufacturing and all that, we all know we don't have manufacturing base, we don't have an industrial base. We have an IT base, and on a small scale with the accelerator that Don Lippert and Maurice Kaya are running for PICTA, the university's Manoa Innovation Center, and High Beam and a few of those.
Slightly radioactive after Act 221.
That's true, but on a small scale, they're trying to bring money, including money from out of state, in to fund startups, and some of those startups are not only very promising, but some have done very, very well. However, they tend to leave Hawaii because, once again, the big investment market is not here. So,
Transportation?
from a public
Like
infrastructure
ferries.
standpoint, perhaps. But most of our transportation, quite frankly, other than the airlines and the inter-island shipping, has been public.
Yeah. Well, maybe it should be. And of course, there's astronomy.
And there's astronomy. But for a lot of other countries and states and even cities, public-private partnerships, where you have a combination of public funding and private funding to run projects successfully, those are have become very, very widespread and very successful models. And that's something where you really leverage the forces of the private sector and the public sector to get more than you would otherwise be able to get from the public side. And from the private side probably wouldn't invest just by itself.
Sure.
In a mass transit system.
Sure. We're going to talk more about that because I'd like to propose to you a case study right after this break. As Gerald Sumida, a partner in Carlsmith Ball, I didn't realize it was that old, a very old law firm here on Bishop Street, here in Community Matters, Management of Offshore Investments. We'll be right back.
Hi, aloha. My name is Chris Leatham, and I host a show called The Economy and You. The show plays every Wednesday at noon, and on my show, I bring on guests who are interested or working in the technology space. And so I'd like you to come and watch the show and learn with me about all the sort of exciting things that we're doing in Hawaii to build and grow our economy ecosystem. So I'd like to say aloha, and I look forward to seeing you on the show. Thank you.
Aloha. My name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island and ER physician. Every other Tuesday, I get to host a show here on the ThinkTech program about healthcare. We call it Healthcare in Hawaii. It's really enjoyable for me to bring other healthcare leaders from around the state to talk about our pressing issues. Hawaii has long been the health state, but we need to keep up the momentum, the inertia, and with your help and with your participation, we can come and share all of the big issues that are pressing day to day. Thanks for joining us every Tuesday, alternating weeks from 2 to 2:45.
Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm here this afternoon with Gerald Sumida, who is a partner in Carlsmith Ball, a business lawyer for about 150 years, give or take, on Community Matters. We're talking about the management of offshore investment here in Hawaii. And I wanted to get to the possibility of a case study. And the case study that I would offer you for discussion is a second ferry, whether you call it super ferry or anything else, that replaces the old ferries that went, you know, between the islands, among the islands, back before airplanes were a big deal. And there's a resolution pending at least a few days ago by Michelle Kidani, trying to have a study of what do you do for a new ferry. Thoughts?
Well, the ferry system, or a ferry system per se, you know, could solve a lot of inter-island transportation issues that airlines right now and Pasha and Young Brothers really are not capable of meeting. You know, the irony is when we had the hydrofoils here a number of years ago, that ultimately, I guess, economically or whatever, didn't quite work out.
Sea flight.
Sea flight, yes. I, like many others, took at least one ride, and other than the length of time it took, found it quite pleasant and nice and sociable and so forth and so on. The next time I encountered the hydrofoils was when I was taken by friends and clients of mine from Hong Kong to Macau years ago. And they were very familiar with Hawaii, and as we were traveling, you know, they said, "Jerry, does this look familiar?" And I said, "Yeah, it kind of looks familiar." And then they laughed and said, "This came from Hawaii."
Oh,
That
really?
started the basis, you know, for the Hong Kong-Macau ferry system.
Interesting.
Okay? And in other places, the then Soviet Union, way back when, plus other places in Europe, one has used ferries. Philippines, same thing. And they work. Now, from an inter-island standpoint, and taking a few perhaps lessons or at least questions off of the super ferry, you know, tracking unwanted species from one island to another, et cetera, yeah, that might be a problem. But it seems to me that those are issues that, confronted, identified, can be dealt with. And should it simply stop what could be a very useful and viable transportation system just because of that? My suggestion is no. Should we study it? Yes. But then again, let's not study it to death. Let's study it with a particular purpose of making a decision, go or no go. Because as we know, studying something to death and not
Is
making
killing
a
it.
decision is making a decision.
Really. So, you know, I was interested in this issue because you mentioned public-private partnerships, and you know, a number of the conversations I've had with people about the super ferry is that what happened there was private investors did the work that government should have done in the first place. If you look at ferries all over the world, you find that government runs them most of the time, especially in the Pacific Northwest. Maybe through authorities, you know, and quasi-governmental agencies, but it's government and funded by government. In this case, with private investors, and they had very little money from government. It was only some of the gangways, I recall, which was probably led them into a trigger mechanism on the EIS, which they regretted. But in any event, it seems like going forward, what I'm given to understand is it'll have to be government because private investment won't participate. On the other hand, you mentioned public-private partnerships, which is still a new animal. It's really not a very old animal.
Actually, it's not a new animal at all.
Okay.
Public-private partnerships are in use in various forms all over the mainland for all kinds of things, including infrastructure projects, as well as Europe, and increasingly in Asia. And years ago, in fact, I attended a program with a number of others from Hawaii. It happened on PPPs in Vietnam for infrastructure development.
Okay.
And a law had been passed, and it was being supported by the Asian Development Bank, among other institutions, IFC and the World Bank Group and so forth, to look at that and to move forward on that basis. And a lot of the investment money would come from both local sources, but also overseas. So it's a vehicle that can be used to accomplish desired objectives. So the catch is, what are your objectives? What do you really want? And then how best to structure it. And if PPP structure works well, then use it.
Well, if I say that Wall Street won't, and I say that the state of Hawaii independently, you know, as the only party to the initiative won't, then maybe a public-private partnership would. So the question I put to you is, assuming that we want to do this, how would that be structured? Assuming, I don't think Hawaii, what I meant to say was Hawaii doesn't have a lot of experience in this. Certainly not in big things like that. It's hundreds of millions anyway. But how would we structure it so that it worked? What sort of new structures would we have to create in government? What sort of relationships would we have to fashion in order to make a public-private partnership for a new ferry, for Michel Guidani's ferry?
Well, the approach that a lot of places take, and we're no exception, is to ask that very question and answer it by setting up a small group to look at it, and then drafting a piece of legislation and having the legislature enact it and the governor sign it, and then say, here we are, world to come. The other way that one might approach it, and we are talking generalities here, so assume all of the qualifications that have to be assumed. But the other way of approaching it is to go to those parties who have done it and are doing it and know how it works in different places in different ways, and say, okay, Jay, you're the expert. You've done it in Europe, Africa, and Asia. You know all about this stuff. Everybody says to go see Jay. What I want to do is this, and I want to do it in Hawaii. And maybe I want to do it so it interconnects 2 or more of the Hawaiian Islands. What would you suggest is how we should do it? You're the person who's doing it all over the place, so let me not presume that I am going to tell you how to do it, but I'm asking you, what would you suggest how we do it? Now, I may agree or disagree. I may want to tweak some parts here and there, but since you're the person who has done it, and I probably don't even know how I could explain it to, an elementary school class, which I should be able to do, okay? You tell me how you think I should think about doing it.
So who makes that call? Somebody got to pick up the phone.
Yeah. Usually it's whoever is, quote unquote, in charge, or who is, for some way or another, charged with the relationship or the credibility or legitimacy to do it. It could be the governor, it could be your legislative leaders, it could be a combination of them, it could be the mayor, it could be the head of the Chamber of Commerce, heading a coalition of business and community and political authorities. It doesn't make any difference. It's a question of, what is, and if you look at successful developments wherever they occur, and not excluding, by the way, any places, cities and towns as well as states in the U.S. mainland, there are a lot of examples where these kinds of initiatives have gone on. We maybe have a tendency to say, well, you're the governor, so you're now the repository of all wisdom and knowledge because you're the governor, and by definition, and therefore tell us what to do. Or we can't solve it, it's really difficult, so let's give it to the legislature. They will surely come up with something, as if they were a magic font of wisdom. Well, we know
Everybody's
life's
passing
more
it off to
complicated.
someone else.
Life's more complicated that way, and we have a lot of expertise in all of those areas, and the question really is to define what we want and who best to start addressing that issue with an idea of trying to accomplish something as opposed to studying something to death and paying hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to consultants.
And then do nothing.
Where either do nothing or do something that's half-baked and end up paying some more hundreds of thousands to fix it.
Or millions.
Or millions, as the case may be.
Well, it strikes me that, you need somebody, as you said, at the top, who picks up the phone and calls somebody who's built a ferry partnership somewhere else and says, hey, give me your ideas, and then we'll try to fashion that locally, and we'll be on the road. We haven't done that, and I guess you could say we haven't done it because we haven't made the call. Why haven't we made the call?
Well, you have this program with and interview all of kinds of people in Hawaii. You should be the one to try to answer that. No, you should be the one to answer that question. The short answer is I'm not sure, but there's no question that a lot of people, I guess, have thought through, so forth and so on. Let me tell you very quickly about something that was really exciting.
Wait one,
Yep.
because we had to take a break.
Okay.
That's Gerald Sumida, Carlsmith Ball here on Community Matters. We're talking about managing offshore investment, which is a very important topic. I mean, we all are affected by it. We're all concerned by it, and we should all study it. We'll be right back after this short break.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen. I host Likeable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii, and I do this because I care about science literacy in Hawaii. I want to spread the understanding that science is a vital and interesting part of everyone's life. I want to make sure the broadest possible spectrum of people understand the beauty and the value of science and realize that science plays out each and every day of their lives. I want you to understand that science is fun. So we bring onto this show each week guests who are scientists, from astronomers to zoologists, and we talk about what they do and how they do it. But most importantly, we talk about why you should care about their work, why you should see that their work has value and impact on your life. So I hope you'll join us Fridays, 1 p.m. here on ThinkTech Hawaii. You can watch us via live stream. You can watch us recorded on Olelo, and you can see us each week. We hope you'll join us.
About building the partnership.
Yeah, okay. Well, actually, that segues very well.
Okay, we're back with Gerald Sumida, a partner in Carlsmith Ball, here on Community Matters, talking about managing offshore investment. I interrupted you. We were talking about building this public-private partnership and the steps to follow.
Yeah, let me give you a real quick example, which is very, very true, and I don't know how many people listening in might either recall it or have been a part of it. In the early 1970s, there was an effort here called Hawaii 2000. It was a total statewide community-based effort led by the governor, who was Jack Burns, beginning to be ill, et cetera, but really spearheaded by George Chaplin as the advertiser, and Glenn Page, a professor of mine at Princeton, but who was at the University of Hawaii at that time. And what they sought to do was to lead a group which had everybody participate in it and was funded by the legislature to the tune of $50,000, which was a lot of money at that time.
Yeah, then, yeah.
To look at what were the alternative futures for the state of Hawaii, and what out of those alternatives would be the preferred future. It was a year-long effort. Every single island participated. Task force reports came up. They were then collated and considered in a multiple-day conference here on Oahu, which was, I think, held in Blaisdell Center, and lots and lots and lots of people were there. From that effort came a number of very, very concrete items, including the precursor of the state energy plan, the state land use law, a whole bunch of things, okay, which are now deemed to be conventional wisdom. What was important about that effort was the work product, clearly, but more so the process, because everybody, without exception, and that includes even age exception, let alone geographic exception, was involved in one way or another, and it was a collective effort of the state of Hawaii and the people of Hawaii to try to determine where they wanted to go and how. And the 10 or so task forces they created, the economy, culture, education, transportation, et cetera. In fact, there was a push there for renewable energy on the simple basis that the world was going to run out of oil, and oil was really cheap back then, but it was going to run out of oil, and we have wind, solar, volcanoes, and all this sort of thing that we should develop just because they were inherently here and good and should be developed, all right? So that effort has never really been replicated, and I think it's time for something like that to do, because one of the problems we have is, you know, and this is true, I think, even nationally, and Lee Kuan Yew's passing kind of reminded me of this a lot. Mm-hmm. We no longer every day talk and think about we, the people and state of Hawaii. It's we, the this group, you, the that group, you know, stakeholders, all these different groups. Very few people go back, if you want to be somewhat romantic, to the JFK realm about asking what you can do for your country, asking what you can do for the state, asking what the state, as the state should do, looking at its future without necessarily subsuming the interest and the grievances, if you will, of different sectors in our society. But saying, yes, that's important, we need to take account of them, but in doing that, where do we, as a state and a society, want to go? All of us. And you know, when you take the we point, and not just use the analogy we're all in the same canoe and then go off to something else, but say, yeah, we all are in the same canoe and there's only one canoe. You know, where do we want to go, and how do we start figuring out how to talk about we as opposed to separately? You know, it can be a very powerful movement, as that one movement showed.
It's just, I mean, I'm really totally in tune with you on this, but I wonder where it changed. You know, from the time from the 2000 conference in the 80s till now, something profound has changed. There's been a profound change, and it's taken us to Kuleana, it's taken us to silos, it's made the we into, you know, constituencies instead. What happened? Do you have a thought about that?
Well, I guess a couple of things. One is the world has changed. I mean, that's a blatantly obvious statement, but it's also very, very true. And it's changed in ways that I guess none of us, you know about, and IT and everything, that social media, whatever you want to call it, that whole ball of wax has changed how people interact with each other, and therefore how society or parts of society interact with each other. It's different. That's number one. The second thing is, I guess it's partly related to that, but fragmentation, social, political, economic, etc. Fragmentation has become much more pronounced. I guarantee you that until about 2 or 3 years ago, very few people other than economists knew what the Gini coefficient is, the measure of inequality. Yeah. Now it's
everyone.
Everybody, okay? There's that side of things. And in addition to that, there's been the rise of various kinds of interest groups. They've always been there, and nothing inherently wrong with that. But where the perspective, in my mind anyway, ultimately comes down to us versus them, as opposed to, look, Jay, you know, you and I really disagree about this, okay? Seriously, and we're not going to change this as a mind, but we agree on 27 other things, so let's go have a beer and talk about the next thing we want to do. Where that gets lost, and it's, you know, us and them, and there's black and white, and there's no room for compromise. And if you feel this way about the issue, you're forever my enemy, and I don't want to talk to you because you have nothing to say. That sets up something that's very, very destructive and antithetical. That's right. And you know, the irony of it is that it is totally contrary to the mythology, let alone the actual substantive real life meaning of what we refer to as aloha. And in that 2000 conference I was talking to, I had just come back from the mainland and as an undergraduate and so forth, and I happened to sit next to Mary Pukui. And she rose to say something, and of course everybody got very, very quiet because she's just that kind of person. And she spelled out what aloha means. And my only regret was I didn't have a cell phone or a tape recorder or something, because it was just absolutely magnificent.
What do you recall?
And well, she spelled it out, you know, A-L, et cetera, as many people have done since. But the way she said it and the fact that it was her, the embodiment of everything. I mean, she was clearly Hawaiian, but she was a Hawaiian with a big H and a small h. And everybody there identified totally with her. And that was the ethos for that meeting or that particular session. And I think most people felt that was what makes Hawaii really special. It is that cultural overlay and that value system. And yes, it has been changing. You can point to all kinds of things, you know, new generation, demographics, out-migration, in-migration, this, that, and the other thing. Yes, all of that is true.
There's a philosophical thing too, though, isn't it? For example, the way you and I learned it in school was that at the end of the day, there was a social compact where we agreed essentially that if the majority had, voted on something, made a decision on something, then the minority, then we were all obligated to go along with it willingly, because that was the way society worked. That was the way democracy, that is democracy. But I think there's a lot of people who don't buy into that anymore. After the majority has voted, after the ink is dry, it's time to appeal. It's time to refresh the whole issue. It's time to start again. It's time to attack the vote. And we never actually come to rest. Thoughts?
I think you're right. I think you're right to a certain extent. I mean, there are, let's face it, every society has rules of the game. And, you know, if you're talking about a democratic society with a democratic governance, representative government and so forth, there are rules of the game that have always been there. It doesn't mean that people haven't fought and scrapped and all that, quite the contrary. But when you lay an ideological overlay, however you define the ideological part of it, so that it's right and wrong, and you are wrong, and if you are wrong, then there's no basis for us really to have any productive talks, for us to compromise because you're wrong. I mean, if that's the attitude, then where do you end up?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you end up in, you know, potentially civil war.
Yeah. Well, you see that happening. I've seen that happening in the GMO issue. There's no way that you can convince people who oppose GMOs that, you know, that they should compromise on anything. And I think this creates a real problem for our society, not only for Hawaii, but for everywhere where this kind of thing happens. We also have people who oppose ocean aquaculture. From other places they come. It's a national initiative to oppose all forms of ocean aquaculture. So you could get a permit or not, but they're never going to agree. They're never going to abide by the will of the majority or the process of the government. It's a fight forever. It's almost religious in nature, and I don't think this really works well.
No, it doesn't. And the one thing you would hope, and this is supposed to be the theoretical basis anyway of a democratic society, is that people will take on the responsibility of seeking to inform themselves of what actually are the facts. And they may disagree about what are the facts or the impact or the implications of the facts, but to try to seek out what the facts are and then make an informed decision. And again, you may or may not agree, but that's what you strive to. When I say, no, if you believe in that, then you're automatically hopeless and there's nothing to talk about and I don't want to talk to you, then you run into a situation where that system's going to break down.
So query, the 2000 conference back in the 80s, if we initiated that this year sometime, brought together the same points for discussion, the same, relatively speaking, the same people, and reinitiated the whole process, would we be better off or not so better off? Would we have a better shot at handling those issues? Or has this process you and I have been talking about, would that get in the way and make it less likely?
I think, you know, if one were to redo this, and some of us have thought about that, the answer is it depends, okay? And the reason I say that is that you had two people that took the lead on this, okay? It was George Chaplin, who was a preeminent, globally respected journalist who believed very, very heavily in community involvement while retaining his objectivity, and Glenn Page, who many, many kinds of experiences in Asia, including being trapped behind enemy lines in Seoul, Korea, when the North visited the South in 1950, June, okay? A young futurist with tremendous imagination, Jim Dator at the university, a political and a legislative leadership that said, hey, this is something that is really good. Most of these people, in fact, all of them, I think, were World War II veterans, so they saw what could happen when things really got very, very nasty. And they had the future of Hawaii very much in their minds in very concrete ways. And, you know, Jack Burns was governor, as Hawaii's only real, genuine statesman, recognized all over the place. That was a combination of people you had. Not quite like the founding fathers way back when.
In many ways.
But a unique. So
yeah.
You need people with that kind, in my mind, with that kind of vision and passion and commitment and understanding of real history, past, present, and what could be, to help bring that together, and with a built-in sense of credibility that, you know, others would very much want to be part of that particular group.
You know, I agree with you absolutely. It would be a function of who.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we could find that kind of leader, and that's another conversation, if we could find that kind of leader and put those leaders together, we could do the same or better than we did in the 80s. That's Gerald Sumida, is a partner in Carlsmith Ball. We've really enjoyed this discussion here on community matters, managing offshore investment. I have to say we only got through a fraction of the kinds of things we might have discussed today, and so we'll have to extract a promise from him to come back again and continue this important discussion. Thank you so much, Gerald.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Aloha.